So the sixth lab, which includes various advanced concepts, is huge. So it's what we're going to focus on for the rest of the day, and you can definitely take it home as well as a homework and continue to work on it if required. We're going to do a lot of things. I mean, so far we have, in the first 5 modules, something that works quite well. It's basic, but it's not perfect. So Lab 6 will allow us to improve it and also to introduce some key concepts that will simplify the dialogue flow and allow it to do more advanced things. And at the end of it, we'll have a chatbot that works quite well, as much as it's limited in scope. But the same principles then can be used by you to apply them to whatever chatbot you need in your business, whether it's internally to your company or externally. And it doesn't matter the size of the chatbot. No matter what size your chatbot is, it's going to use the same principles. So you can reuse the same ideas. And of course, if you're a developer, you can read the documentation and see examples of more advanced features like connecting to an API to make calls to a remote database, or retrieve information dynamically, and more advanced features. But all of those require quite a bit of coding. It's nothing too crazy, but you need to be a developer essentially for that kind of stuff. So what we'll cover today in the advanced concepts section is all accessible to any business user without being a developer. So without further ado, since it's a very big lab, I'm going to do it live for you. You get an idea of how it works and what kind of problems we're going to solve, and then you're going to do it yourself through the hands-on. Okay, so we can start by thinking about one problem that we're facing. So let's say I say, what are your hours of operation in Sydney? Okay, hours info is detected, location Sydney is detected, I get the right response, can click on the little pin and see where we are, all good. So now I'm going to say, and where is it? And I get a generic list. So, I mean, technically it's still a correct answer, but if I was having this chat with a person, they would clearly give me the address, since we know it, for Sydney. But the chatbot doesn't. So as you can see in the second input, the right intent is detected, but there's no entity. And the reason why is that entity or entity values exist only in the current input. So there's no memories of the entities. So while we're processing it, if it was passed in, it will exist. After that, we completely forgot that. In other words, we have no context of what happened before. It's just about the current input from the user. And as shown here, it kind of limits what you can do. It makes the chatbot look dumber than it needs to be. So one way to solve that is to use the concept of context variables. So unlike entities, context variables stick around for the duration of the conversation. If I click on at the top on Manage Context, you'll see that we get one for free, which is time zone. So that's automatically detected for you. So if you need to refer to the time zone of the user, you can always use $ time zone. But we also can store our own. In our case, it would be good to store the city if at some point, at any time during conversation, a city is given. I'd like to store it, and then I can reuse it for various things to add a little bit of context to my conversation. So one way to do it, there are multiple ways, and we'll explore at least a couple of ways to do it. But one way to do it is, what we can do is create a node just under welcome that does nothing. All it does is, it's executed if a location is provided, it assigns the context variable, and then it passes on the conversation to the rest of the nodes as if nothing happened. So one way to do that is, I'm going to create add node. I'm going to call it maybe assign city, because that's what it does. I want this executed only if a location was passed. I don't want a response because this is not the node that responds to the user. It's just a pass-through node, a sort. But I can click on these three icons next to then respond with, and I can select Open Context Editor. So here I can define a variable. We can call it location, but I'll call it city. And the value, since I know I have a location, I'm just going to assign whatever value the location has. The next action here by default is always wait for the user input, because typically that's what a node does. It processes it, it gives a response, and then we wait for the next input. But that's not what we're doing here. Here we're just assigning the variable, and then we want the rest of the nodes to be evaluated. So what I can do is I can click on jump to, and I want to jump to the node below. So I'm going to select hours of operation. Now when you jump from one node to another, you have three options. You can jump and then wait for some input, but we haven't responded yet to the user, whatever they asked us, so we don't want to do that here. The second option, which is probably the most common option, is to jump and then evaluate the condition. So we're basically saying, keep going to hours of operation, see if it applies, then respond. Otherwise, keep going down the list, which is what we want. And we can also jump to respond, which is our basically response in that particular node directly, which is not what we want in this case, because